Well, hey there. Before I dive in today, I want to share some exciting news. This morning, enrollment opened for my preschool sleep program that is going to also be coming with 6 support Zoom sessions that I will be offering throughout September. So, this is something that I'm just doing a couple times a year, and I will be next offering it in January. So, if you are looking for a little extra support to go along with my preschool sleep program for your 2.5 to 6 year old, now's the time to join. To learn more, visit AllisonEgidi.com/YPSC or click on the link in the show notes. All right, on to this week's episode. In my opinion, toddler clocks are without a doubt the most valuable sleep tool a parent can use for children over the age of 2. Today, I'm going to share the key to ensuring that one of these little clocks or light systems will become your best parenting hack. Hi, I'm Allison Egidi, a pediatric sleep and wellness coach and a mom of 2. I love to help parents find solutions. This is How Long Till Bedtime. In the event that you're not yet familiar with toddler clocks or light systems, I want to go ahead and start by quickly explaining what they are and how they are supposed to work. A toddler clock is really a light system that is supposed to help your child know when it's time to be in their bed and when it's okay to get up, leave the room, etc. You set the light to turn a specific color, often yellow or green, to let your child know when you'll be coming back to get them out of their crib or when it's okay for them to get out of their bed and leave their room. Some of these light systems also have a color like blue or red that can indicate when it's time to sleep, while others don't have any color at night and they just turn on to indicate when it's okay to get up. A little bit more on that later. So I always encourage all parents to introduce a toddler clock or one of these light systems. I'm going to kind of use those names interchangeably to their child when they turn 2, even if their child is an amazing sleeper. While I'm an advocate for keeping children in the crib as long as possible, if you don't already know this about me, listen to episode 26, 5 Myths About the Crib to Bed Transition, and then I'll tell you all about it. But while I advocate for keeping them in the crib, you really want to start preparing your child for that transition out of their crib long before it actually happens, ideally starting at the age of 2. If a child understands that a parent will come get them out of the bed when the light turns green for months or years before you switch them from the crib to the bed, it is so much easier for a child to understand that expectation of having a big kid bed. That expectation is that they stay in the bed until their light turns green. Ideally, it's like an old habit by the time you move them out of the crib and into that bed. Additionally, the light system can really provide comfort for these toddlers and preschoolers who are now able to have thoughts like, I'm awake. I wonder if it's time for me to get up. When they have a light system, they don't need to wonder if it's time to get up, and they don't need to call for you to figure out if it's time to get up. They can just roll over and see that the light isn't green yet and know that it's still time to be sleeping. These lights are particularly magical for those of us with an early riser. As many of you know, Addison was a 5:50 a.m. riser throughout her toddler and preschool years. But thanks to her toddler clock, she knew to lay in her bed and chill until the light switched on at 6:30 a.m. So it bought me an extra 30 to 40 minutes each morning. So, how do I recommend you introduce the clock to your child? And what is the key to ensuring that it, quote, works? If If you have a child who hasn't yet turned 2 years old, I recommend giving it to them on their birthday as a birthday present. As I think most of you know, Ainsley, my second daughter, started sleeping through the night at 8 weeks. And other than a short bout with the 18-month sleep regression, she's been an amazing sleeper for her whole life. But you better believe I gifted a toddler clock to Ainsley for her second birthday, and she was thrilled to receive her big girl sleep light. When you give your child the clock, I want you to explain how it works. This is your big girl sleep light that you get now that you are 2 years old. This thing is so cool because it's going to turn green when it's time for you to wake up in the morning and when your nap time is over. When it turns green, that's how you're going to know that it's time for mom to come back in and get you out of your bed. If your child is already over the age of 2, you're going to go ahead and introduce with very similar language, just saying, now they're old enough to get this clock, which is really exciting. And here's how it's going to work. So whether that's going to be that's when you come back to the crib, or that's when they can leave their room if they're already out of their crib. Then, as you're putting your child to bed each and every night and before a nap, if they're still napping, I want you to remind them about the light. Okay, I want you to get lots of great sleep. I'll be back to get you up in the morning when the light turns green. And then each time you enter the room to get your child up in the morning or at the end of that nap, or if they're no longer in the crib, when they leave the room after the light has turned green, I want you to mention that the light turned green. Look, the light is green. That means it's time to get up. You stayed in your bed until the light turned green. Good job. You want to build them up that this is a good thing. And by repeating it every day, it's going to become the new habit and expectation. As your child is learning to understand the light, I recommend setting the light to turn on close to their natural wake time, but also within a reasonable wake window. So let me give you 2 examples. A reasonable wake window for most kids is going to be between 6 and 7 a.m. So if you have a child who's typically waking at, say, 6:30 a.m. right now, which is totally reasonable, go ahead and start by setting that clock at either 6:25 or 6:30 a.m. That way, we're going to get some really easy wins without having to work so hard, and your child's going to catch onto the clock very quickly. If, however, you have a child who's waking before 6 a.m., so kind of before my reasonable window, let's say 5:30 a.m., I typically recommend that you go ahead and set that light for 6 a.m. right out of the gate. We want to set expectations of what is reasonable for a wake up time. And then once your child understands and respects that light, which you're going to know because they're either going to be pointing to it when you come in the morning if they're not super verbal, or they might say light or green, or if they're an older preschooler, they're going to acknowledge it in the morning. So once they are respecting the light and understand it, you can always start to bump it out a little bit. Like I said, Addison was waking at 5:50. We started with the light set at 6. Once she could wake up at 5:50 and stay calm until 6 without being agitated or calling for us, then we started to bump it out in 10-minute increments until we got to 6:30. Now, let's talk about the key to this light actually working. And if you're multitasking, I want you to come back to me now. You, the parent, need to follow the rule of not getting your child up out of their crib or letting your child leave their room before the light turns green. So if your child is up 5 minutes before the light switches and they are throwing a fit, you can't just say, well, the light's going to turn green in 5 minutes, so let's just go ahead and get up. The moment you cheat on that light rule or that clock rule is the moment that your child realizes this light and the rule that comes with it is completely optional. And I have no doubt that some of you have been listening here today and you've been thinking, yeah, well, I tried that light and it just didn't work for my child. Well, I would venture to guess it's because you didn't hold that structure. So that's my tough love of the day. You really have to hold that boundary and not let your child get up or start their day before that light turns green. Because our kids are just too dang smart for that. I mean, of course, some kids, if you give an inch, they're not going to take a mile. But I find as it relates to this light, the vast majority of children will just throw in the towel on following the sleep rules related to the light if the parent even give up once or twice. My one exception would be around illnesses. That's where we kind of throw the light to the side. But unless there's some extreme example, you have got to stick to the light. So if you are one of those parents that tried the clock or the light without success, I don't want you to panic. I don't want you to think it's too late. We can't go back. I want to assure you that you can reintroduce it. Not only do I help parents reintroduce these lights multiple times a week, I also did this with Addison, my oldest. I tried to introduce the clock to her when she was about 18 months old, which was before we'd worked with a sleep coach. And I definitely didn't stick to the rule of the clock or the light. So she totally ignored it. So it was in there, but it was set, but we weren't really following it. Her sleep was a disaster. So I definitely didn't think that the light quote worked. But when we did sleep training for that very last time when she was nearly 2 years old, we reintroduced the clock and we stuck to it. And it was a complete game changer. So if you're in that situation of having a clock or a light that isn't working, I just want you to acknowledge to your child that you know you tried using the light before and it didn't work. And I want you to tell them that it didn't work because neither of you followed the rule. But the good news is that starting tonight, everyone's going to follow the rule of the sleep light. That means that your child needs to stay in their bed until that light turns green. Then I want you to explain what's going to happen if your child calls for you or if they leave their room before the light turns green. There's where you really need to have a plan. And I want you to explain that plan. And then it's about sticking to that plan that you've shared with your child and seeing it through. So whether you have a child over the age of 2 who is an amazing sleeper, or a 4-year-old who's waking you during the night or waking you at 5 a.m., I recommend that you introduce a toddler clock or light system ASAP. If your child is having sleep struggles, you do want to introduce that clock with a bit of a bigger plan around how you're going to respond if they don't follow that rule. Before I wrap up, I want to touch on which toddler light system I recommend and the settings I like. There are many toddler clocks and lights out there, and they can all work. So if you have one, I'm not trying to pressure you into buying a new one. In fact, my kids don't even have the one that I'm going to recommend because it didn't exist when I introduced the lights to them. And I do fall into the camp, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So they still have their originals, although one is breaking, but it gets the job done still. So my favorite light system that I recommend to the families I work with now is the Hatch Baby. I'll link to it in the show notes. There are 2 different versions. I'll let you know kind of the big difference that you can think about as you consider which one you'd like to buy. And I really like this light system for a few reasons. First of all, you can control it from your phone. This gives you much more flexibility. So if your child is up 5 minutes early and they're throwing a fit and you're ready to pull the plug on this whole thing, you can switch the light from your phone without your child even knowing, and then you can allow them to get up and start the day when their light turned green. So it can make it easier to not cheat on the rule of the light, but still give you a little more flexibility. Second, it has different light options. So if possible, I always recommend having no light in the bedroom when your child is supposed to be sleeping. I walk through my thoughts on nightlights in episode 9. It's called What You Need to Know About Nightlights and Fear of the Dark. So if you want to hop over there and listen to why I want kids sleeping in the dark, you can go ahead and do that. But ideally, we have no light on when it's time to sleep. So if your child's accustomed to having no nightlight, I really like to have the hatch because you're able to set it to just turn green or to your child's favorite color, because there are lots of options, in the morning, and then having no light on during the night. If, however, you have a child who's already accustomed to a nightlight and this is a battle that you really don't want to pick right now, the hatch does have an option to have the light set to red for sleep. You can set it to any of the colors, but I recommend red because red is the color least likely to disrupt sleep. So it's the best color to use for a quote night light or sleep light. And the hatch allows you to control the brightness. So I would recommend setting it on the very dimmest setting because there's always a risk that any light, even the red light, can disrupt your child's sleep. And so we really don't want to have bright lights on in there. So those are some of the reasons that I really like the hatch. And that's the product that most of the families I work with end up using. And if you're looking for some additional assistance around how to handle middle of the night wakings or early wakings as you introduce one of these sleep lights or sleep clocks, don't forget to check out my preschool sleep program that I've designed for 2.5 to 6-year-olds. You can find that info at AllisonEgidi.com/YPSC or click on the link in the show notes. I hope that I have inspired you to introduce or reintroduce, if necessary, a light system to your child when they are 2 years old or older. We still have the light system in my 8 and 9-year-olds' rooms, not because they can't tell time, but because I don't even want their little brains to become alert enough to focus on a clock in the middle of the night or in the early morning hours. I like that they can just roll over and see that their light hasn't turned yellow yet. And that's their indicator that still time to go back to sleep. I promise that these light systems are amazing tools. And if you stick with it and stay consistent, you and your child are going to ultimately love having these. Thanks for joining me today. And I hope that you'll come back again next week. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to How Long Till Bedtime. To learn how we can work together to improve your child's sleep, please visit sleepandwellnesscoach.com.